Emma Walker had always thought of herself as a practical, quietly resilient kind of woman. The type who kept her head down, paid her bills on time when she could, and didn't expect much from the world. At 32, she worked the morning shift at a corner cafe in downtown Seattle, a place that smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon pastries and the exhaustion of people chasing better lives. Most days, she tied on her apron with a dutiful, uncomplaining smile, served lattes to hurried commuters, and tried not to think too much about how far she was from the dream she once had. But this Friday felt different, heavy, unsettled, like something was about to crack. Emma stood in her tiny studio apartment, staring at herself in the cracked mirror by the door. The fluorescent bulb flickered, casting a pale, unforgiving light over her face. She wore the only dress she owned that could even remotely be called date-worthy, a soft navy blue number she'd bought on clearance 2 years ago, when she was still trying to pretend her life was headed somewhere. Tonight was supposed to be her first blind date in nearly 2 years. 2 years since her ex had walked out with another woman and left her with a broken heart, an empty apartment, and a stack of unpaid bills. 2 years since she'd promised herself she wouldn't get hurt like that again. Since then, she had built a carefully guarded, emotionally cautious routine. Work, sleep, repeat. No risks, no surprises, no hope. And yet, somehow, her best friend Olivia had talked her into this date. "Emma, you're not a museum exhibit," Olivia had said over the phone a week earlier. "You're allowed to live. At least go get dinner with the guy. What's the worst that could happen?" Emma had laughed then. Now, standing alone in her apartment, the answer felt painfully obvious. The worst thing had already happened. A dark brown coffee stain bloomed across the front of her dress like a cruel joke. She stared at it, frozen, her heart sinking into her stomach. 10 minutes earlier, she tripped over her own backpack while rushing to get ready, sending her travel mug flying. The hot coffee had splashed straight down her front, soaking the fabric and leaving behind an ugly, conspicuous stain she couldn't wash out in time. Her chest tightened, her throat burned. "Perfect," she whispered bitterly. She tried blotting it with a damp towel. Nothing. She sprayed a little cleaner. The stain only spread wider, turning her once nice dress into a pathetic, embarrassing mess. Emma dropped onto the edge of her bed and stared at the floor. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Olivia. "You ready?" Emma picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could just cancel. She'd canceled before. She was good at it. She could say she was sick, or tired, or that something came up at work. She opened a new message. "Hey, I'm so sorry, but—" Her fingers stopped. She looked back up at her reflection. A woman with tired eyes, smudged mascara, and a coffee-stained dress. A woman who was so exhausted of always shrinking, always hiding, always quitting before she even tried. Something inside her, something fragile but stubborn, snapped. She deleted the message. Instead, she typed, "Running a little late, but I'm still coming." She tossed the phone onto the bed and let out a shaky breath. "Okay, Emma," she murmured to herself. "You're doing this." She grabbed a lightweight cardigan and slipped it on, trying to cover as much of the stain as possible. It didn't really help, but it was all she had. With a nervous, uneven laugh, she picked up her purse and stepped out into the chilly Seattle evening. The sky was low and gray, the air smelling like rain and damp pavement. Downtown buzzed with traffic and neon lights, people rushing past with places to be and people to meet. Emma walked 3 blocks to the little Italian bistro Olivia had chosen for the date, her heart pounding harder with every step. By the time she reached the door, her hands were shaking. She almost turned around, but then she saw him through the front window. Jack Miller sat alone at a small table near the window, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a simple button-down shirt and clean jeans. He looked slightly awkward, endearingly nervous, glancing at his phone and then at the door as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with his hands. He looked real, not intimidating, not flashy, just a man waiting. Emma swallowed. She pushed the door open. The bell above it chimed, and Jack looked up. Their eyes met, and he smiled. A warm, open, unmistakably genuine smile that made her chest ache in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. He stood up immediately. "Emma?" he asked. She nodded, suddenly painfully aware of the stain on her dress, of how small and unpolished she must look standing there in front of him. "Yeah, hi, I'm sorry," the words spilled out in a rush. "I had this whole thing happen, and my dress got messed up, And I almost didn't come, and I know I probably look like a disaster, but I promise I'm not always like this. Her face burned with humiliation. She braced herself for the look she'd seen too many times before, the polite disappointment, the quick calculation of whether she was worth the effort. But Jack didn't look annoyed. He looked concerned. "Hey," he said gently, "it's okay. I'm really glad you came." For a moment, Emma just stared at him. In that tiny pause, with her heart beating too fast and her confidence hanging by a thread, she had no idea that this imperfect, coffee-stained night was about to change everything. Emma sat down across from Jack, still clutching her purse against her side as if it might somehow hide the ugly coffee stain spreading across her dress. Her cheeks burned, and she could feel her pulse thudding in her ears. This was the part she dreaded, the quiet second when someone decided whether she was worth staying for or not. Jack pulled out his chair and sat down slowly, his movements calm, considerate, almost deliberately gentle. He didn't stare at the stain. He didn't make a joke. He just looked at her with a kind of steady curiosity that made her feel, for the first time in years, genuinely seen instead of silently judged. "So," he said with a small, disarming smile. "Rough day." Emma let out a shaky laugh. "You have no idea." She took a breath and decided she might as well tell the truth. "I spilled coffee on myself 10 minutes before I left. I thought about canceling, like, really canceling. But I didn't want to keep hiding forever." Jack nodded slowly, as if those words mattered. "That takes guts." Before Emma could respond, he glanced down at her dress and then back at her face. There was something thoughtful in his eyes. "Hang on a second, okay?" he said. He stood up and walked toward the front door. The second he left her line of sight, Emma's heart dropped straight into her stomach. Of course, she thought. Here it is, the polite exit, the awkward disappearance. She sat there feeling small, exposed, and painfully foolish for thinking she could walk into a date like this and not be rejected. Her hands twisted together in her lap as she fought the urge to grab her coat and run. 2 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. Jack walked back in, holding a dark gray hoodie in his hands. He stopped at the table and held it out to her. "I keep a spare in my truck, in case Lily gets cold or I spill something on myself. You can throw it on if you want. It'll cover the stain." Emma stared at the hoodie like it was something unreal. "You didn't leave," she said softly. Jack looked surprised. "Why would I?" I thought," her voice cracked. "Most people don't stay when things look messy." He sat back down, resting his arms on the table. "Well, most people miss out on a lot that way." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She took the hoodie and slipped it on. It was warm, a little oversized, and smelled faintly like clean laundry and sawdust. Somehow that simple scent made her feel safe in a way she couldn't explain. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack smiled, a warm, reassuring kind of smile. "You're welcome." They ordered food, pasta for her, a burger for him, and as they waited, something shifted between them. The tension of a first date faded into something softer, more natural. Jack told her about his work. He ran a small home repair business, fixing kitchens, patching roofs, remodeling old bathrooms. "It's not glamorous," he said with a shrug, "but it pays the bills. And Lily thinks it's cool that I carry a tool belt." Emma smiled. "Who's Lily?" "My daughter, she's 7. His expression changed, becoming more tender, more open. "It's just the two of us. Her mom passed away 3 years ago. Car accident." "I'm so sorry," Emma said, reaching across the table before she even realized she was doing it. Jack gave her a small nod. "It's been hard, but she's my whole world." Emma felt a quiet ache in her chest, a mix of sadness and admiration. This man wasn't pretending to be okay. He was just still standing. She told him about the cafe, about how she'd been working there for 5 years, saving every dollar she could, sending money to her mom when she needed help with medical bills. "Sometimes it feels like I'm running in place," she admitted. "Like no matter how hard I try, I'm not really going anywhere." Jack listened, really listened, his attention focused and respectful. "I get that," he said. "Life doesn't always look like progress, even when you're doing everything right." By the time their food arrived, Emma realized she wasn't nervous anymore. She was laughing, talking, being herself in a way she hadn't been with anyone in a very long time. An hour passed, then 2. When Jack finally walked her out to her car, the night air was cool and fresh, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement. "I guess I still have your hoodie," Emma said, holding it up. He grinned. "Keep it for now." Gives me a good excuse to see you again. For the first time in years, Emma drove home feeling something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The next few weeks passed in a soft, unexpectedly tender blur that Emma wasn't prepared for. She and Jack kept seeing each other. Coffee dates before his job sites, quiet dinners after her cafe shifts, long walks along the waterfront where the cold air made their cheeks pink and their conversations feel more honest. There was something refreshingly uncomplicated about being with him. No pretending, no trying to impress, just two tired people slowly realizing they felt less tired together. Emma still wore Jack's hoodie sometimes. It was a small thing, but it made her feel oddly comforted, like a reminder that someone had chosen to stay. One evening, about 3 weeks after their first date, Jack asked if she wanted to come over for dinner. "I should warn you," he said on the phone, his voice playfully cautious. "My place is kind of chaotic. Lily's been building some kind of Lego empire in the living room." Emma laughed. "That sounds better than most places I've been." When she arrived, Jack's house was warm and lived in, with kids' drawings taped to the fridge and a faint smell of spaghetti sauce in the air. Lily peeked around the corner when Emma walked in, small, curly-haired, with big brown eyes that studied her in a carefully guarded way. "This is Emma," Jack said gently, "the one I told you about." Lily gave a shy wave. "Hi." "Hi," Emma said, crouching down to her level. "I like your castle." Lily's face lit up instantly. "It's a dragon fortress." Dinner was simple but cozy. Lily asked Emma all kinds of questions. What was her favorite color? Did she like dogs? Did she know how to make pancakes? Emma answered everyone with a warm, earnest smile, sensing how important it was for this little girl to feel safe. Later, after Lily went to her room to draw, Jack and Emma sat on the couch in the quiet living room. A soft lamp glowed in the corner. "She likes you," Jack said. "That doesn't happen easily." Emma swallowed. "She's amazing. You're doing a really good job with her." Jack's eyes softened. "Some days it doesn't feel like it." Emma hesitated, then said what had been sitting in her chest. "I think that's how most of us feel. Like we're all just trying not to mess everything up." Jack smiled gently. "Yeah, that sounds about right." They sat in comfortable silence. Something rare and precious. Emma felt a strange sense of belonging, like she had stepped into a life that somehow fit her better than her own. But just as she was beginning to believe this happiness might last, everything changed. 3 days later, her cafe closed. The owner called an emergency staff meeting and delivered the news with a voice that sounded tired and defeated. Sales were down. Rent was too high. They couldn't keep the doors open. Emma stood there numb, listening to her coworkers gasp and whisper. Her paycheck, her stability, her routine, gone in a single sentence. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. Jack had texted twice, asking if she wanted to grab dinner. She didn't reply. The truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of becoming a burden. Terrified that if he knew how close she was to falling apart, he'd see her differently. The next morning, Jack showed up at the cafe, now dark and empty, with 2 coffees in his hands. "Emma," he said gently when he found her, "why didn't you tell me?" She crossed her arms defensively. "Because it's my problem." Jack shook his head. "I care about you. Let me help." "I don't need saving," she snapped, her voice trembling despite herself. "I'm not trying to save you," he replied. "I'm trying to stand with you." He offered her a job helping with his business, answering phones, scheduling jobs, keeping paperwork organized. But Emma shook her head, pride and fear mixing in her chest. "I don't want pity," she said. Jack looked hurt but calm. "It's not pity, it's partnership." Still, she said no. That night, Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. For the first time, she wondered if the greatest risk wasn't being hurt again, but being alone when she didn't have to be. And deep down, she knew the choice she was making would change everything. The weeks after the cafe closed felt like a slow, relentless freefall. Emma woke up every morning with a knot in her stomach, reaching for her phone the way people reach for oxygen, hoping, almost desperately, that some job application had finally gotten a response. But all she ever found were automated emails or, worse, nothing at all. Her savings shrank day by day, and the unpaid bills on her kitchen counter began to look less like paper and more like quiet threats. She stopped answering Jack's messages, not because she didn't care, God, she cared too much, but because she was afraid of what he would see if she let him too close. A woman with no job, no plan, No safety net. A woman who felt exposed, fragile, and painfully out of control. Her landlord called, then emailed, then left a notice taped crookedly to her door. Emma stared at the eviction warning like it was written in a foreign language. 30 days. That was all she had before the last thing she could call hers disappeared too. That night she sat on her bed, holding Jack's hoodie in her hands. It still smelled faintly like him, warm and familiar. For a moment she almost called him. Almost, but fear won. 2 weeks passed in a blur of rejection emails and restless nights. Emma barely slept. She skipped meals. She avoided her reflection. And every time her phone buzzed with Jack's name, her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, at Jack's house, Lily noticed. "Why hasn't Emma been here?" she asked one evening, poking at her mashed potatoes. "Did I do something wrong?" Jack's heart cracked a little at the question. "No, sweetheart. Emma's just dealing with some hard stuff right now." Lily frowned, her small face serious. "When things are hard, that's when you help people the most. You always tell me that." Jack swallowed. "You're right." 3 days later, he showed up at Emma's apartment. When she opened the door, she barely recognized herself in the reflection of the glass. Her hair was messy. Dark circles sat under her eyes. She looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. "Can I come in?" Jack asked quietly. Emma stepped aside, too tired to pretend she was okay. The second the door closed, everything she'd been holding back finally broke. She sank onto the couch, covering her face as sobs tore out of her. "I'm failing, Jack," she cried. "I can't find a job. I can't pay my rent. My mom needs money for her meds and I don't have it. I'm losing everything and I don't know how to fix it." Jack knelt in front of her and wrapped his arms around her, steady and strong. He didn't try to solve it. He just let her fall apart. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "I don't want to be your charity case," she whispered, her voice raw. "I don't want you to stay because you feel sorry for me." Jack pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes intense but sincere. "I'm not here because I feel sorry for you. I'm here because I care about you. Because I'm falling for you." Emma froze. You are?" she asked, barely breathing. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And Lily adores you. We want you in our lives, not because you're perfect, but because you're you." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time, they didn't feel like defeat. They felt like release. They sat together and made a plan. Emma would take the admin job Jack had offered, at least for now. She'd move in with her mom to save money. They'd figure things out one step at a time. "We're in this together," Jack said, brushing her hair back gently. "No more shutting me out." Emma nodded, shaky but hopeful. For the first time since everything started falling apart, she didn't feel so alone. 14 months passed faster than Emma could have imagined. Sometimes when she sat behind the desk at Jack's small construction office, sipping lukewarm coffee and answering the phone for the fifth client of the morning, she had to stop and remind herself that this was real, that her life no longer looked like a slow collapse. When Emma first started working there, the office had been a chaotic, barely functional mess. Papers were stacked everywhere. Invoices went missing. Jack's voicemail was always full. Schedules were scribbled on sticky notes that fell off the wall and vanished. Emma took one look at it all and felt something inside her click. She didn't panic. She didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt capable. Within weeks, she'd built a digital filing system, organized client records, and created a calendar that actually made sense. Jack watched her move through the office with focused, confident energy, fixing problems he hadn't even realized existed. "You're kind of a miracle worker," he joked one day. Emma smiled. "I just hate chaos." The crazy part was how much she loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about taking a broken system and making it work. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. 3 months in, they landed a major contract to renovate a small apartment complex. It was bigger than anything Jack had ever handled before, and he wouldn't have even bid on it without Emma's help. When the call came in confirming they'd won, Jack picked her up and spun her around like a kid. "We did it," he laughed. "We actually did it." Emma laughed too, tears in her eyes. It felt like proof that everything she'd gone through had led her exactly here. That night, after everyone else had gone home, Jack sat across from her at the office desk, his expression serious. "I want you to be more than just my office manager," he said. "I want you to be my partner. In this business, in life." Emma's heart raced. "Jack, that's a big step." He nodded. "You've earned it." She said yes. At home, Lily danced around the kitchen when they told her. "So you're staying forever?" she asked Emma. Emma knelt down and hugged her. "I'm not planning on going anywhere." For the first time in years, Emma felt something solid beneath her feet. She wasn't just building a career or a relationship. She was building a home. Emma knew something was different the moment Jack texted her an address instead of a plan. "Wear something nice, trust me." That was all he wrote. She smiled at her phone, feeling a familiar flutter in her chest as she drove across Seattle. When she pulled up to the small brick building by the river, her heart skipped. It was the same Italian bistro where they had gone on their very first date, the night she'd walked in with a coffee-stained dress and a heart full of doubt. Jack was already there, standing outside looking nervous in a way that made him even more handsome. When he saw her, he took her hand immediately, like he was afraid she might disappear. "I wanted to bring you back here," he said quietly, "because this is where you showed me who you really are." They sat at the same corner table, the same soft lighting, the same quiet music in the background, but everything felt different now. Stronger, deeper, real. Jack reached under the table and pulled out a small box. 14 months ago, you walked through that door thinking you weren't enough," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I saw someone brave, honest, and unbelievably strong. You showed up when things were messy, and that taught me what love really looks like." He opened the box. Inside was the hoodie, the one he had given her that first night, neatly folded beside a simple, beautiful ring. Emma covered her mouth, tears already spilling. "Emma Walker," Jack said, dropping to one knee, "will you marry me? Will you keep building this life with me? And with Lily?" She didn't even hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. The restaurant erupted in applause. Jack slid the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, the whole world felt warm, safe, and impossibly perfect. Later that night, as they walked back to the car, Emma squeezed his hand. "Can you believe all this started with a ruined dress?" She laughed softly. Jack smiled. "Sometimes the most broken moments lead to the most beautiful endings. And that's the real heart of their story." So let me ask you, have you ever almost walked away from something that could have changed your life? Have you ever let fear convince you that you weren't enough? If this story reminded you that showing up imperfect is still showing up, and that sometimes love meets us when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that warm the heart and restore a little faith in the world. Because you never know, the moment you're about to give up might be the moment everything finally begins.